You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Everybody knows you, but please name your name.
Paul Bird, I'm the attorney here in Little Rock, Arkansas. I am hesitant to claim to be a constitutional scholar. What I did learn about constitutional law and freedom of speech is that there probably should be a law that you cannot yell it is snowing in a crowded legislative room. But nevertheless, I'm here. Representative Ballinger has already done an excellent job of telling the history, and it made me need to start throwing my notes away. But I do want to go back to the history of how this came about. Religious freedom, the Freedom Exercise Clause, has always been a fundamental right. It is a fundamental right in this country and a constitution, both state and federal. And we lived under, when I was in law school, what was called the Wisconsin v. Yoder standard. And that was where the Supreme Court, in a case where an Amish schoolgirl was being told she had to go beyond the 8th grade, required to go to school. And the family proved that it was a long-term Amish religious belief. And so the United States Supreme Court said that the state had to have strict scrutiny. That's what this is about. Along came a case that Representative Ballinger has already talked about, which is the Employment Division versus Smith case. The United States Supreme Court heard it in 1990. And at that point in time, there was a law in Oregon against having peyote in your bloodstream. And 2 guys got fired because of it. And they were 2 American Indians. They belonged to the Native American Church. And there was a strong religious belief. The peyote was used in their religious observances. So they weren't out recreationally taking peyote. It was part of their religious beliefs. And the United States Supreme Court held that since it was a law that was general to everybody, a neutral law of general applicability, this law about not using peyote, that it didn't violate the freedom of exercise of religion clause. And this created quite a firestorm, because you can imagine a state passing a myriad of laws that are general, but that would violate a constitutional right. So, ironically, in the 90s, when this decision came down, there was broad support for the Religious Freedom Act from both very liberal groups and very conservative groups. The Christian right and the ACLU came together for a broad-based support. I don't know what happened to not have that situation now, other than this LGBT issue, which I am not here to even discuss, and is not an issue here. I was helping try to get this bill passed 4 years ago, long before there was any ordinance in Fayetteville. But subsequent to the Religious Freedom Act getting passed and applying to everybody, there was another case out of Texas, City of Bourne versus Flores, where the Catholic Church wanted to expand its building. It violated a historic land use law in the city. And the Catholic Church said, we need to build this building, make it bigger. That's part of our religious expressions and our religious freedom. And the United States Supreme Court held that the RIFRA law did not apply to the states through the 14th Amendment. Therefore, it was if it was a federal law, then RIFRA applied. If it was a state law, it didn't. And so here, if you look at the history of, we've always had, when we have a fundamental right involved, we have strict scrutiny. And that's always been the case in our country, especially under freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, all those things. So here we are now with this huge vacuum of, we've got a religious freedom law that basically what it did was reinstate the Wisconsin v. Yoder standard, but it now doesn't apply to the states. So all these states started passing a RIFRA law to try to get it back in place. All we're trying to do is get, but another thing that happened when the law came down that RIFRA didn't apply to the states, Congress passed what's called the RLUIPA law, which is Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Person Act. Religious land use for the issues that municipal league was just talking about, Institutionalized Person Acts for prisoners and what have you. That is still the law of the land. That's going to apply regardless of what you do here today or not. The land use issues that the municipal league just discussed, they're going to have the same budgets and whatever. I would imagine that when somebody passed the Civil Rights Act, there was an argument of how much money it was going to cost to prosecute those defendants. Let me move on. I recently read the biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Lutheran minister in the 30s in Nazi Germany. When Hitler started passing the Aryan policy to allow discrimination against Jewish people, Dietrich Bonhoeffer started speaking out against it, and it was against his religious beliefs. Unbelievably, this law that was of a neutral law of general applicability to everybody became laws that applied to Lutheran ministers. And one of the things that Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote about when he was in prison by the Nazis was how did a Christian nation become a nation that abided by Hitler's Aryan policies and discrimination against the Jews. And I firmly believe we have lived in a country for 200 years that took fundamental rights, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, to have a strict scrutiny. We live in a country where that hasn't happened. We can't conceive of that happening. But here we have allowed where a neutral law of general applicability could all of a sudden apply in a horrific way. And I'm always having people say, oh, well, the parade of horrors, you always bring them out and they play in the Nazi card. But that truly happened. So our United States Supreme Court created a gap over the peyote case. I just wish they'd have let the guy have his peyote. We wouldn't be here. We'd still be dealing with strict scrutiny where you have to have a compelling government interest in the least restrictive means. I think this is good policy. I don't think it's about LGBT. That issue is going to be worked out into the courts. Whatever the court decide, I don't believe this law is going to allow discrimination. If anything, it may prevent discrimination. I appreciate you letting me take the time, and I'll answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Senator Burnett? Senator Rice, you have a motion?